Hello friends, welcome to Drishti YouTube and also to our session of Economy Simplified, in which we are discussing many of the topics in short and in detail with some questions. In the same series, we are here to discuss the concept of crowding out effect. On this, the question has come this year in the prelims UPSC 2026. Let's see what is the crowding out effect. Friends, you see, we understand the concept of the budget, right? And the budget is about the government's statement on the upcoming year's expenditures and the receipts and the borrowings. And the budget, we know, have the deficits or the surplus. In India, our expenditures are much more than what we receive, and that is why usually in India we have a fiscal deficit, right? So usually we have a concept that we receive, for example, rupees 100 in the budget from the taxes, and we are expected to spend rupees 120. So 20 is our fiscal deficit in this case. Now, how does the government fulfill the fiscal deficit? The government actually borrows from the market, from the banks, from the economy by issuing the government bonds, government securities, T-bills, right? So what happens is the government borrows from the market. Now, the market has a limited amount of money in a given time or a year. Suppose the economy has rupees 30 with the banks which are available to be lent out to the private sector. Now, if the government borrows rupees 20 from this amount to fund their fiscal deficit, so in the market, what happens is a large part of the money available goes to the government, and only rupees 10 is available with the banks to lend to the private sector. When the government has borrowed a lot of money, the money is not available in the market, or whatever the money is available at high rates of interest, because when the banks know that they have less money and the large number of borrowers are lined up to have that money, the banks will increase their rates of interest. So what happens is, when too many people, here the people means the private sector, the borrowers, the businesses, when too many people are chasing too less of money, this leads to a situation called crowding out. That a small amount of money is being chased by large number of people. As a result, the interest rates go up. When the interest rates go up, what happens is the private sector investments suffer. Production gets costlier, and the government has taken a lot of money from the economy, affecting the money supply for the private sector. So all these phenomena are linked to a concept called the crowding out. So what happens is, when the government has high fiscal deficit, when the economy has high fiscal deficit, and the government borrows money from the markets, that lead to the scarcity of money in the economy, and that the scarcity of money in the economy leading to high interest rates, low availability of money, is known as a situation called the crowding out effect, which increases the interest rates, which affects the private sector, which affects the capital formation in the economy. So this is the crowding out effect. Let's see some questions. So you see, the first question is about the statement or the definition only. Which of the following fiscal developments is most likely to trigger a structural crowding out effect in a developing country like India? You see, if you see all the statements, let's see the statements. The first statement, a sharp reduction in the revenue deficit. See, the crowding out takes place when the government has high deficits, either fiscal or revenue, right? If the deficits are lower for the government, they will not borrow much money from the market. As a result, the crowding out will not take place, right? It takes place only when the government has borrowed a lot of money, because the government has, say, a lot of deficits already in their budgets. That's why reduction in the deficits will not lead to crowding out. If the government borrows in high amount, the high government borrowing to finance the expenditure, such as the subsidies And this is a situation of the crowding out, and that leads to, as I said, that the government borrows, the government in a country like India borrows for, say, subsidies for the populist measures. As a result, the capital formation is also suffering. That's why this is a correct statement in this context. The third is the revenue neutral rationalization. Friends, it's not about the GST, right? And it's not about, say, any green bonds. So, the main aspect is the government borrowings to fund the deficits, which has led to increase in the interest rate. So, this is the right answer here. Answer is B. The second question we have a similar question to understand the concept. Which of the following best describes the structural mechanism of the crowding out effect in an economy? Have a look here. You see, what is the mechanism? The first statement is a decrease in the private investment resulting from expansionary monetary policy. Friends, you see, this statement is wrong because this is about the fiscal policy which has increased the interest rate. So, this is lowers interest rates. This is an incorrect statement. The second is a reduction in the private capacity driven by high corporate tax rates. And this is also not correct because it's not about the taxes as of now. It's about the private sector is not able to invest because there is no much money left in the economy. The third, we have a phenomena where increased government borrowing drives up the interest rates, reducing private sector investment. Friend, this is a correct statement where we see that yes, a phenomena where the government is spending or the borrowing has increased, which has led to the reduced investment from the private sector. So, this is a correct statement. And the third is the fourth statement is it's not a kind of displacement on the exchange rate. So, this is not a correct statement. The answer is C, that this is the best description of the crowding out effect. So, this is the second question that we have. Let's see the third question. The question is to mitigate the crowding out effect of necessary public infrastructure spending without fueling structural inflation. The central bank and the government can adopt which of the following mixes? You see, the question here is that we need to mitigate the crowding out effect, right? The point is when the crowding out takes place, the government has borrowed money, and we know in India it is mostly for the populist schemes. As a result, the private sector, the infrastructural money is not available. As a result, infrastructure suffers. The private sector is demotivated, but the government has its own necessity, private has its own importance. That's why we have to mitigate the crowding out, right? We have to mitigate the lack of availability of the money, and we have to promote the private sector investment. So, what can be done? This is the question, right? And without fueling the inflation, right, we need to ensure that inflation is not there, because if you increase too much of money in the economy, right, this will lead to inflation. That's why money was less in the economy, that we understand. But without having the inflation, what can we do for the mitigation of the crowding out? You see, the first statement is a rigid tightening of the monetary policy combined with a high fiscal. Friends, if you increase the fiscal deficit, right, you will further lead to more crowding out. So, this is not a correct statement, because the tightening of the monetary policy again will also lead to reduced money supply, and this will also lead to overcrowding, right. So, this is not correct. The second is the calibrated monetary easing. That is means measured monetary easing. The RBI is issuing or releasing the money in a calculated manner to absorb the government debt, right, and provided inflation expectations are anchored based upon the inflation data, inflation targeting, RBI may release money in the market, so that whenever the, say, economy has some money, bank has some money, they are absorbed by the government to fund the fiscal deficit. The RBI may release some money by, say, cheap interest rates, low repo rates, so that the banks have enough money to fund to the private sector. So this looks okay, because this is a way which can be used by RBI to fund money in the economy. Now, there is no rightness in the statement imposing any cap on the private lending. We cannot impose a cap on the lending, right? And it's not the complete monetization of deficit. It means, see what? The deficit being monetized means the new notes are printed. That is not acceptable anyway. So this is not correct. This is also not correct. The government cannot issue new notes to fund the deficit. It can't ask the RBI to print new notes to fund the deficit. So this is not correct. This is not correct. Answer is the B, that we have to have a calibrated, right, stand to ensure the money supply is there without having the crowding out, right? You see, one more question: how does the implementation of the FRBM or the strict fiscal consolidation? See, friends, this means the strengthening of the government finances. When the government finances are strengthened, it's called fiscal consolidation, right? So strengthening the government finances is called consolidation. So how does the implementation of the fiscal consolidation, like the FRBM Act, counter the crowding out effect? You see, government is very populist. At times they use the budget to say woo people, to make people happy. In that process, they increase the fiscal deficits, right? So how does the FRBM do or act to help the crowding out not being there? So FRBM has put that the fiscal deficit should not say exceed 3% of the GDP, right? So FRBM has put some caps on the fiscal deficits. See, when we lower the fiscal deficit, we also lower the crowding out, because the deficits increase the government borrowings and the borrowings increase the crowding out. So here what we have, that the FRBM actually lowers the government market borrowing requirements. The government cannot borrow beyond a given limit. As I said, it's a 3%, but still the government has a deficit of 4.4%. So they have to tell the parliament that this is my borrowing, they cannot go beyond this. So when that FRBM is there, the government borrowing is limited as well as the crowding out is minimized. So this is the correct statement. It's not about the central bank printing currency. It's not about shifting the finance burden to any FPIs, or it's not about the corporate taxes. It's about the FRBM will limit the government's borrowings. As a result, they will also limit the crowding out. So friends, this is all about the crowding out. I hope we are clear. It's linked to the fiscal deficits. Fiscal deficit we have seen in another video. We have seen the concept of fiscal deficit, right? So fiscal deficit is high, crowding out is high, and that is why cut the deficits, cut the crowding out, let the private sector flourish with the adequate capital. See you in the next video. Thank you.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.